Team, we're joined now by our friend Adam Kredo. He's a senior writer for the Washington Free Beacon, going to bring us up to speed on all things in the world of national security. What's up, Mr. Kredo?
How are you, sir? It's a pleasure to be with you.
Great to be with you. Let's talk. Trump administration eyes opportunity to squash Iran, China, North Korea missile threats. What is going on here on freebeacon.com?
Yeah, I find this to be an interesting one. Look, for too long we've had missile defense systems based in the U.S. that are aging, that have been beset by problems, and I think the time is now in Congress to ask for funding to really boost this type of defense. Look, the Iranians, we know every day, are testing ballistic missiles, are trying to advance their reach across the globe. The North Koreans have been doing it for some time, and other rogue actors such as China and other countries already have the capability, even in Russia. So how do we do this defensively? I think the eye in Congress is to finally build some sites on the East Coast that could provide missile defense and rework what we already have by providing full funding. And from what I can tell with the Trump administration and the national security members that I spoke to, they fully support this type of effort.
Nice. So what will it take to get this thing going?
Money. I mean, honestly, money. It's really about funding. So when the president puts out his budget, where the Obama administration did not fund certain programs, like I mentioned, the East Coast Missile Defense Site, things of this nature, they're hoping that the Trump administration does. So look, this is not just an Iranian threat or a North Korean threat. There's a much larger gap. Essentially, from what I can tell in this letter, the lawmakers are saying to Trump, we started doing a lot of things in the 80s under Reagan. I mean, we all remember the top line of Star Wars and this type of thing. But look, technology has advanced wholesale, and we're now in a position, especially with the technology that the Israelis have built, to put in missile defense that works. I read just earlier today that Israel's missile defense system intercepted rockets from Egypt and Gaza and areas in the Sinai. So look, this stuff works. Why not put it in America?
Let's talk about CNN comparing lightning strikes to breaking terror attacks. What's this all about?
By the way,
this doesn't surprise me as somebody who worked over at CNN. After every terrorist attack, the games that were played over there were always, we can't tell what the motive was, but he said on video why he did it. We can't tell what the motive was. Let's not jump to conclusions. Islamophobia is the real enemy, and maybe we should ban guns. But he used a truck. We should still ban guns. That's the way it went over there all the time.
Well, look, I think you're absolutely right, and I do find it frightening. I don't think we should ever make light of terror attacks, but there is something wildly silly and bizarre about a CNN anchor, the person who's supposed to present a realistic vision of the world to you, for this person to get on television and say, well, look, lightning strikes kill the same amount of people as terrorism in the United States, I think does a disservice to the viewer. Maybe that's true statistically, but I think we know statistics never give you the full picture. Terrorism is something that is willed. Terrorism is something that is ideology and based in reality. Lightning strikes happen to be random. And like Congressman Sean Duffy said, who happened to be interviewed at the time on CNN, he said, look, if the government could legislate against lightning strikes to save lives, we probably would, but we can't. Terrorism is something we can actually address. Now, the kicker on this, and I'm sure you'll appreciate this, the kicker on this, right after this interview where they made the lightning strike comparison, they cut to a breaking terror attack. 20 people murdered in Kabul as a result of a terror attack.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that on the one hand, they'll tell us that terrorism is not that big a deal, and we're overemphasizing it in this country, and you know, whenever we talk about taking action to defend the homeland, that's the tack that the left will take. That's the tack that they'll take, and then they'll also tell us, well, we don't spend. You know, what about terror attacks overseas? There's so many of them, and they're ignored. Well, which is it? Is terrorism a smaller problem or a bigger problem than we're led to believe? It seems like they change with any given day.
They do, and I can actually tell you the reason that I think this is the case. I think very much the left wants to make terrorism a public relations battle, whereas terrorism does not operate that way. It is indiscriminate, and it kills people across the globe on a constant basis. So to create the perception that terrorism is either random or maybe it's because it's a reaction to the U.S. or other Western countries, I think does a real disservice to Americans. Look, we never want to create the perception that we're living in an emergency state, right? But safety, I think the idea of safety has become a very important concept, not just here in America, but also in Germany and other places, where in Germany we see gun sales skyrocketing like they never have before. That's because people feel unsafe. And the reason for that happens to be terrorism. So why not address it on a policy level where we can actually prevent this rather than creating a narrative that really doesn't comport to the reality on the ground?
What do you think of the report yesterday that Iran fired off another missile?
Look, it doesn't surprise me. I know it's big news here in America and that people pay a lot of attention to this, but honestly, it does not surprise me. Under the Obama administration and even before, the Iranians were test firing, testing technology, things of this nature, all as part of their ballistic missile program. So this is going over there on a daily basis. They are doing this. So on one hand, I find it surprising when the media wants to finally pay attention to the Iranians doing things like trying to launch a missile towards Tel Aviv or potentially launch a missile towards the United States. I find it surprising when people find this to be breaking news because, honestly, it's happening every day. The only difference is that the Obama administration never enforced the sanctions already in place on this behavior.
And the Iran deal going forward with the Trump team now in charge, what do you think happens there? What are your expectations for how they're going to handle the framework that has been passed on to them by the Obama squad before them?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a conversation I have on a daily basis, honestly, with the White House and other sources that I kind of communicate to about the issue. As far as I can see, I don't think the Trump administration has an appetite for wholesale dismantling the deal, and I actually happen to agree with that. I think that's a bad idea. We already have an architecture in place that the Iranians are at least somewhat beholden to. I think we build upon this, and we do this with sanctions, and we do this in other ways. The Iranians will routinely whine and cry that sanctions are illegal under the nuclear deal. In fact, they are not. The Iranians, if you can believe it, are lying about that. The Iranians will say ballistic missile testing does not violate the nuclear accord. In fact, it does. Under the United Nations Resolution 2231 that codified the nuclear agreement and set the parameters legally for it, ballistic missile tests violate the deal. So we need to have a stomach for telling the Iranians they are wrong and they are lying. The Obama administration did not do this. I am hopeful that the Trump administration will, and I think we've seen this from Michael Flynn and others I've spoken to, that in some sense the gloves are off.
Also on freebeacon.com, Congress moves to cut immigration to the U.S. by half. I read about this a couple of days ago. Is this? Yeah. What are you hearing from your White House sources on this and from Congress? Is this really going to go forward?
Well, look, I think that it comports, one, with the Trump administration's own vision of immigration, right? We saw the executive order halting immigration from these countries that are really hotspots for terrorism or have a majority where terrorists exist. I think that this immigration bill has a lot of top-line items that are not particularly controversial. I think that it's easy to get lost in the statistics that halting immigration by 50% and halting the entrance of refugees by 50% sounds like a lot. But in fact, if we look at the numbers historically, this brings us down to probably where we were in the mid-2000s. We've had an explosion of immigration over the past couple of years. And really, I think what Cotton and David Perdue and the Senate are seeking to do is just bring this down to where we have been historically, and also give our security apparatus a chance to rebalance, a chance to figure out how to properly screen people, which we were not doing under the Obama administration. So I see this easily winning support, honestly, even among Democrats.
Adam Kredo is a senior writer for the Washington Free Beacon. He is at KREDO0 on Twitter.
Zero.
Mr. Kredo, great to have you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
It is always my pleasure, sir.
All right. You got to come hang out on the night show, too. Get ready for that. We'll be in touch. Talk to you soon, buddy.